Bless all the paths our feet walk to be free. Bless all the paths our feet walk to be free. Yeah.
All right. So March 28th, 1968, the civil rights movement was in full swing, and in Memphis, there was a march that turned violent. And Dr. Martin Luther King was participating in that march that day, and afterwards he became deeply depressed over the violence that had occurred. And those that were close to him commented later on that they had never seen him so disturbed by any of the things that had happened in his career to that date. And the next morning he appeared at a press conference, a changed man. He was strong and calm and eloquent and in command. And a news person came up to him afterwards and said to him, "What happened to you since last night? Have you talked with someone?" And he smiled and replied, "I haven't talked with anyone except God." And he went on to say that God has been profoundly real to me in the recent years. And in the midst of outer dangers, I feel an inner calm. And in the midst of lonely days and dreary nights, I have heard an inner voice saying, "Lo, I will be with you." Tomorrow, we're going to celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday, although it isn't actually, I think, until Friday. One of the greatest human beings, in my opinion, in our lifetime, and maybe in all time. A man who changed the course of history by putting himself over and over and over again in harm's way, by speaking up against the status quo, and by standing up for the rights of those who were being discriminated against. And when the innocent people around him were being blown up, mowed down with fire hoses, had police dogs turned on them, murdered, or simply disappeared, when in those kinds of outer circumstances were occurring in his life and there was nothing he could do about them, he went within, where all things are possible. And he did the only thing he could do in those circumstances. The only things we can do in those circumstances. He healed his heart. He changed his attitude. He calmed his anger. He renewed his strength and his courage. Because in those moments, that was all he was able to change. Last Sunday, I talked to you about my trip to India. And before I even talked to you, I was standing there and we started singing a song. And in that moment, I had this giant aha. The phrase, "all things are possible," is a phrase that I have heard and said hundreds, if not thousands of times in my span of the New Thought movement. And it's a word that I use loosely. This may not make sense to you, but it might. Loosely and with conviction. To give me hope and a foundation to put my life on. That foundation, however, was sand, and over time it eroded away. And until I went to India this last fall and began to have a sense while I was there that it's true, all things are possible, I rarely, if ever, have used those words in the last few years. Because it has been my mission to rid us of those sort of silly phrases that we throw around and yet don't deeply understand the meaning of. Because it's not that the phrases are incorrect, it's that the context in which we use them is so very incorrect. And so, let me give you an example. All things are possible. In this moment, it is not possible for me to lift Becky over my head. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some cosmic event that could occur in this moment for 1 nanosecond that allowed me to lift Becky over my head. But if I counted on that as the way to move through the world, I would never probably be lifting Becky over my head. Realistically, for me to be able to lift Becky over my head, I would have to make it my priority, at least for the next year probably. And the truth is, I may never be able to accomplish that. I may just physically not ever be able to accomplish that particular thing. But if I tried really hard for the next year, and then imagine that I also decided that I wanted to become a lawyer. And while I'm working at the gym and going to law school, I want to start a business and run for president. Now, if we truly believe that all things are possible, then we have to believe that they're always possible for everyone all the time. So, apparently, I can do that without any problem. But what we know is, the truth is, even Superwoman couldn't accomplish that. Because clearly it is not possible out here in the world. All things are not possible. Now, I don't want you to confuse that with the idea that anything could happen. Because anything could happen at any time, but good or bad. When we say all things are possible, we're only talking about good. Because we say it, all things are possible. You're right. Floods and famine and earthquakes and massacres, all things are, in that sense, lumped into possibility. But I'm just trying to take this and put it in our proper context. And the proper context is, when we use it and say it out there, all things are possible, what we're really hoping is that something good is going to happen. Clearly, we have created for ourselves a ton of confusion over what these words really mean. Because they don't mean anywhere, anytime, with anybody, under any circumstances, that all things are possible. As long as we live in a three-dimensional world, I know, other dimensions are available. But as long as we live in a three-dimensional world, all things will never be possible. Not out here, not in the third dimension. It's not going to happen. Elephants aren't going to start singing one day. It isn't going to be that way. And this is why. Because I want everything to be orange. And not all of you do. I want 60s rock and roll music to be piped into the streets, and not all of you do. I want 2 days of complete silence. No one talking anywhere at all. I want all weapons destroyed. Now, I could go on painting the picture of what I consider the perfect world, but it would be pointless, wouldn't it? Because all of you are living in it too. And so my all things are possible world is impossible. It just is. It just doesn't work that way. It works, but not that way. And the quicker I get to the reality of how all things are possible really works, the sooner I can stop wasting my time on what's pointless. So last week during my talk, I said to you that all things are possible, and when I hear this, I roll my eyes. Because the distance between that idea and the other ideas that are necessary to make that happen, for most of us, that distance is immense. And so I rarely see it manifest. But in India, that distance is short. And so it does manifest more often. And to remind themselves of keeping that distance short, they fill all the available space with symbols and altars and incense and chants and songs and little pictures and statues of gods and goddesses everywhere. You might have gone away hearing those words and thinking that I think that those incense and chants and altars and practices and blah, blah, blah are the reason that distance is short. And it's not the reason. It's the reminder to keep it short. All of those things are simply reminders to keep that distance short. We sang a song last week called I'm a Point of Light. And in that song, it says, and that's when I had my aha moment. I am a point of light in the light of God, endless with possibilities. I can fill any darkness when I recall I am a point of light in the light of God. There is where all things are possible. In that place, in me, the darkness can be changed in me when I remember I am the light of God. I can fill any darkness in me with that light. I can't fill it in you. That's absurd. I can't even fill it out here in the world. That's ridiculous. But in me, all things are possible. When I turn in and let that light lead, when I get that I am the light of God, all things become possible. I'm the endless possibility. You're the endless possibility. Not this idea that because we're standing here, we have the power to make anything happen in our world. It's just not true. We have the power to make anything happen in here. There is the truth. Now, where did this catchy, misguided phrase come from? That's important to know. Because we go along saying it. How many people know who said it? Jesus said it. And we know how Jesus has been screwed up. Not Jesus was screwed up, how Jesus has been screwed up by this outer part because of the interpretation that's been taken on. So Jesus was talking to some people, and they said, and this is you all know this. This is where the guy comes in and he says, "What must I do to have eternal life?" Now he doesn't say, "What must I do to get rich?" He doesn't say, "What must I do to get a job? What must I do to have a great relationship?" He says, "What must I do to have eternal life? What must I do to get in that space with God eternally?" And he says, "Oh, keep the commandments." And the guy says, "I'm already doing that. So what else do I still lack?" And he says to him, "Go sell all your possessions, give everything to the poor, and follow me." Now, hear this really closely. Get rid of your stuff. Why? Because that's not where all possibility lies. So detach from that. Because that isn't God's world. Remember this 3D world? We talked about this when we talked about Jesus. This isn't God's world. And if stuff were valuable in God's world, then Jesus would have never said, "Oh, get rid of it. That's what it takes. It takes that." He would have said, "Oh, accumulate more because there's God." Didn't say that. So, those words weren't meant for the 3D world. They were meant for the man's inner soul and spirit. And the young man went away. We all know why, because we ain't giving up our stuff. And because in that outer condition, all possibility does not lie. Does not lie there. It lies not in that outer condition, but in this condition. So the disciples get really nervous, and they say to him, "Well, then who can be saved?" So who can have this God experience? And this is what he says. Because remember, the question is eternal life. God, with God forever. How do I be with God forever? And Jesus says, humanly, it's impossible. But within God, all things are possible. Out here, it's impossible. But in here, all things are possible. I am a point of light in the light of God, endless with possibilities. I can fill any darkness in me when I recall and remember that I am a point of light in the light of God. I can heal any hurt in me. I can forgive anyone. I can transform any judgment, any prejudice, any anger, any hate, any fear, any resentment. I can fill any darkness in me when I remember that I am the light of possibility, myself, in here. Martin Luther King knew where all things are possible live, in that light of God. He knew where all the darkness could become light. He also knew that in this world, It was the only thing he could really change. It was the only thing he could be certain that he could change. Because he also knew if he didn't change his anger and his hate and his hopelessness into peace and love and hope, that he would never have the ability to change it out here or impact it. Because do our actions matter? Do our thoughts matter? Do what we do matter? Does it matter if I hit Becky or give her a hug? Yes, it matters. In me, if I am in a state of love, I'm going to give Becky a hug. If I'm in a state of overwhelming anger, I might hit Becky. So does it matter? Yes, it matters. But it's the only thing I can guarantee is that what I can do in here, never what I can do out here. I can impact what happens out here in the world based on what I've done in here. That's it. That's it. Nothing else that we can do in that way. So I want us to be clear about this idea of where all possibility lies. And like Dr. King, I want us to understand that, so we're not wasting our time trying to make things happen that we can't make happen in the condition that we're in. So I invite you to spend more time on the real possibility and less time complaining about or being frustrated about or sad over what looks like the impossible possibility.
Bless all